Donald Trump has apparently canceled his threatened doubling of planned tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. That development after Doug Ford and U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick spoke earlier today. Ford said the pair will get together in person for discussions on the ongoing trade war this week. In turn, Ford is pausing a threatened 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S. Ford says it's time the U.S. and Canada cooled off.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is responding tonight, calling these tariffs unlawful and unjustified, while promising all of the money collected from retaliatory tariffs will go to Canadian workers.
Well, I'm never confident with President Trump. I'm confident with Prime Minister Carney. I know he's going to do his very best to get a deal, but I don't trust President Trump. He'll say one thing one day and say something else and then in the news the next day. We want a fair and free trade. But if he wants to attack our steel industry, our aluminum industry, other industries, we need to hit him back.
35%. That's the number that sent shockwaves through boardrooms from Toronto to Washington on July 10, 2025. Without warning, President Trump announced he would slam Canadian imports with a massive tariff hike, effective August 1st. But here's what nobody saw coming. Canada didn't flinch. They didn't scramble. They didn't cave. And that response, or lack of one, reveals something far more dangerous than any trade war we've seen before. The official justification was fentanyl. Trump accused Canada of failing to stop drug smuggling across the border, claiming the crisis demanded immediate action. But behind closed doors in Washington, trade officials were telling a different story. The real trigger wasn't drugs, it was retaliation. Canada had maintained counter-tariffs on $60 billion worth of American goods. Measures first introduced under Trudeau and kept in place by Prime Minister Mark Carney. Steel, aluminum, and other key sectors remained protected. Canadian tariffs that Trump viewed as a direct challenge to his authority. Think about this for a moment. Since Trump began his tariff crusade, dozens of countries have faced his threats. The European Union buckled. Japan negotiated quickly. Mexico bent over backwards to avoid confrontation. But only two nations dared to push back with their own tariffs, China and Canada. And while everyone expected China to resist, Canada's defiance caught Washington completely off guard. The timing wasn't random either. Trump had already been testing his tariff powers globally, hitting Brazil with 50% duties and slapping 30% on imports from Iraq and the Philippines. But Canada got the harshest treatment of all. Why? Because in Trump's worldview, allies who don't fall in line are worse than adversaries who fight back. When August 1st arrived, something extraordinary happened. Canada didn't retaliate. Prime Minister Carney had warned of possible countermeasures if no deal was reached, but when the deadline passed, Ottawa stayed silent. No new tariffs, no angry press conferences, no dramatic walkouts. Instead, Carney chose a path that frustrated Trump more than any retaliation could: strategic patience. Building the Canadian way means sustainability, collaboration, and restraint, Carney would later explain to his cabinet. This wasn't weakness, it was calculated resistance. By maintaining existing measures while refusing to escalate, Canada kept the door open for negotiation without appearing desperate. They defended their steel and aluminum industries without feeding Trump's narrative of a trade war. The confusion in Washington was palpable. Trade Representative Jameson Greer told CBS the tariff rates were pretty much set and unlikely to change. But on the same day, White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett told NBC that negotiations were ongoing and deals were still possible. Nobody seemed to know what Trump actually wanted, including, perhaps, Trump himself. Then came the Mexico twist. On July 31st, just hours before the deadline, the White House made an announcement that exposed the entire charade. Trump declared that August 1st was final. No extensions, no exceptions. But at the last minute, Mexico received a 90-day grace period. The official reason? Mexico's unique situation as a border nation cooperating on drug trafficking. But wait, Canada shares an even longer border with the United States, over 5,500 miles of it, the longest undefended border in the world. If border security was really the issue, why didn't Canada get the same consideration? The answer was painfully obvious. Mexico had agreed not to retaliate. Canada hadn't. Trump's spokesperson tried to spin it as a strategic decision, but the logic crumbled under scrutiny. Just hours before the tariffs took effect, Trump himself revealed the real game by citing Canada's recent recognition of Palestine as a reason for the breakdown in negotiations. That had nothing to do with trade, and everything to do with punishment. They've been treating our country very badly for years, Trump declared at a press conference. I love Canada. I have so many friends in Canada, but they've been very poorly led. The message was clear. This wasn't about economics. It was personal. Yet Canada still didn't blink. While Trump expected panic in Ottawa, what he got was methodical preparation. Canadian officials quietly reviewed contingency plans, not just for industry protections, but for diplomatic and legal countermeasures if needed. The Royal Bank of Canada released an analysis showing that the 35% tariff wouldn't significantly alter the country's economic outlook. Why? Because nearly 90% of Canadian exports to the U.S. remained protected under the USMCA agreement. This was Canada's ace in the hole. Unlike Europe or Japan, who faced blanket tariffs on almost everything they shipped to America, Canada had built-in protections through the trade agreement Trump himself had signed. As long as those exemptions stayed in place, Ottawa could afford to wait. And wait they did. The contrast with other nations was striking. The European Union, threatened with 30% tariffs, had quickly settled for 15% across the board, a deal many European commentators called more symbolic than strategic. Japan followed suit almost immediately. But Canada chose a different path. They didn't stage a confrontation. They didn't refuse to talk. They simply declined to be hurried. This guy will say something one day, and he'll wake up and the cheese slips off the cracker, one senior Canadian trade official observed privately. How do you deal with a guy like this? You don't react, you respond. The strategy was working better than anyone in Ottawa had imagined. By mid-August, American businesses were starting to feel the squeeze. The price of Canadian lumber shot up 42% overnight, sending home construction costs through the roof. Energy prices in states dependent on Canadian hydroelectric power jumped 17%. And here's the kicker, Trump's own base in the Midwest was getting hit the hardest. Wisconsin dairy farmers watched helplessly as their exports to Canada, already struggling under existing counter-tariffs, became completely uncompetitive. Michigan auto parts manufacturers saw their supply chains grinding to a halt. Minnesota's paper mills, reliant on Canadian pulp, faced shutdowns within weeks. The irony was brutal. Trump's attempt to punish Canada was punishing his own voters instead. We're looking at economic suicide here, warned Dr. Sarah Chen, a trade economist at Georgetown University. When you share a 9,000-kilometer supply chain with your neighbor, putting up a 35% wall doesn't hurt them. It collapses your own house. But the real genius of Canada's response wasn't just patience, it was precision. While maintaining their existing $60 billion in counter-tariffs, they began quietly diversifying. Trade missions to Japan increased by 300%. New agreements with the European Union accelerated. Most significantly, Canada started deepening ties with an unexpected partner, China. The numbers tell the story. In the 3 months following Trump's tariff announcement, Canadian wheat exports to China jumped 47%. Potash shipments doubled. Even more remarkable, Canada began importing Chinese electric vehicle batteries for the first time, bypassing American suppliers entirely. What started as Trump's punishment of Canada was morphing into something far more dangerous, a fundamental realignment of North American trade flows. By September, the pressure on Trump was becoming unbearable. Republican senators from border states were flooding the White House with angry calls. Tom Cotton from Arkansas watched his state's rice exports to Canada plummet. Josh Hawley from Missouri saw his agricultural base revolt as soybean prices collapsed. Even Trump's most loyal supporters were questioning the strategy. Nobody wins a trade war with your own shadow, Senator Mike Lee privately told colleagues. And that's what we're doing, fighting ourselves. The breaking point came on September 23rd. Ford Motor Company announced it would have to idle 3 plants due to disruptions in the Canadian parts supply chain. 22,000 American jobs hung in the balance. That same day, natural gas prices in New England spiked 30% as Canadian suppliers prioritized other markets. The American Petroleum Institute released a scathing report showing that Trump's tariffs had effectively handed market share to Russia and Saudi Arabia. Behind the scenes, Trump's economic team was in chaos. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent argued for immediate de-escalation. Trade Representative Greer insisted on staying the course. Commerce Secretary Linda McMahon found herself caught in the middle, trying to explain to furious CEOs why their biggest trading partner had suddenly become enemy number one. The president believes Canada will fold, one senior aide revealed on condition of anonymity. But every day they don't, we bleed more. Canada's strategy extended beyond economics. Prime Minister Carney launched a diplomatic offensive that caught Washington flat-footed. In a speech to the United Nations, he positioned Canada as the responsible partner, committed to rules-based trade despite provocation. European leaders, still smarting from their own capitulation to Trump's threats, began openly praising Canadian resolve. "What we're witnessing is remarkable," observed French President Emmanuel Macron. "A middle power showing the world how to stand up to bullying without becoming a bully yourself." The Chinese dimension added another layer of complexity. Beijing watched with intense interest as Canada demonstrated that American pressure could be resisted without open confrontation. Chinese trade officials began studying what they called the Ottawa model, strategic patience combined with market diversification. If Canada could survive Trump's assault, perhaps the entire architecture of American trade dominance was more fragile than anyone realized.